Drew Hanks. Dr. Hanks is an assistant professor in the Consumer Sciences program area of Human Sciences Department. Drew received his BS from Brigham Young University and his PhD and master's from Washington State University. Before joining us here at Ohio State in 2014, Dr. Hanks was the research director for the Cornell Center for Behavioral Economics and Child Nutrition Programs and lead analyst for the Cornell Food and Brand Lab. In this capacity, he published numerous articles on behavioral economics of food choice and presented his research to audiences such as food service managers, academics, and government officials. As a behavioral economist, Dr. Hanks extends traditional economic models of decision-making to capture psychological aspects of consumer choice. His primary research interests are in consumer food choice and intake and the economic and psychological factors that influence these decisions. He also is interested in the differences in food choice and intake that arise based on cultural heritage and social background. Today, Dr. Hanks will be sharing his research on how and why behavioral economics influences food choices and intake in school lunchrooms. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Hanks.
Thank you. Thanks to folks at the Crane Center for inviting me to give this presentation. I'm very grateful and always excited to talk a little bit about my research and share what I do. So is it okay if I stand right here? Is that all right? Perfect. I can push the buttons. So very good. So as I present, please feel free to interrupt me, ask questions. I don't care, clarification or any other sort of question. And to be honest, I'm a little bit nervous to be here because I'm not a child psychologist by any means. I'm an economist, and so I understand the Crane Center has a lot of child psychology. That's the research they do. And so I'm very open for any suggestions or comments or anything from those of you who have more experience in child development or child psychology. Once again, my background's in economics, and I like to study food choice and food intake. And so to kind of set the stage to get us all thinking about the research, I want you to think back to a restaurant where you ate that was just a very, very pleasant and nice experience. So just think about it and tell me, when you're imagining that restaurant where you ate, what's like the first word that comes to mind? The first memory that comes to mind when you think about that? Anybody? Cinnamon? Okay, so a nice pleasant aroma. Okay. Was it with the dessert or just what's what you said? French toast. Okay, very nice. Anything else? So aroma. Elegant. Okay. Okay, very nice. Elegant. Anyone else? Loud. Okay. Right. Different preferences, right? Different restaurants, right? Okay, so.
You and I can go to the elegant quiet.
Well, then they'll go to the loud one. Very good. So, but as you think about this experience, right? One individual spoke about the food, the other spoke about the environment. And that's what I want to talk about, is that environments can really influence how we choose, the foods we choose, and not only what we choose, but how much we end up eating of that food. Okay? And so the question, as we think about the environments we eat in, if the restaurants that we remembered were elegant and just very pleasant, why do school lunchrooms, or many school lunchrooms, still serve food the same way as they have for the past 30 years? That's the question, right? Why? If context matters, if situation matters, why are many still serving food the same way? Okay? Oops. So what I want to talk about today is a decision model. Okay, I won't get into any math, but just the general framework. But talk about what economists assume in terms of decision making. Then we'll talk about why these assumptions aren't true in many cases, all right? And then, if these assumptions aren't true, what does it mean for food choice in general, and then in the context for children? And I'll motivate that a little bit. And then, if we understand where these assumptions fail, what can be done? What can we do with this new information about behavior, especially related to food? And so what I'm going to do is to give you some background to what we call the Smarter Lunchrooms movement and how it started, and put it in the context of choice and how this concept of behavior and these deviations from what might be considered rational behavior have led to what we refer to as the Smarter Lunchrooms movement. So let's begin. Okay, what do we assume to be true as economists? People are rational, basically. They think like Spock. Okay, they're very deliberate in their choices. They collect all the information. They understand that information. They know where to get it. Okay, they know their preferences between options. All right, when they're introduced with different, for example, food choices, they know if they like the bananas or the apples, or if they like this entree versus that entree. Okay, those are some of the just very basic assumptions, and these preferences are consistent. Not only are they consistent between food choices, but they are consistent over time. Okay, so that's the assumption. It makes sense, right? You think, yeah, we use our cognitive processes to make decisions, and we like to collect information about these decisions. But the assumption is that we're robots, and is that true? Well, what we tend to observe is a little bit different than Spock. Okay, we tend to observe a little more of this irrational behavior where individuals are emotionally driven, situationally. Their decisions are based upon the situation they find themselves in, social norms. They don't quite understand all the information that they gather. They may not know where to collect the relevant information. Okay, even if they do know their preferences between the options that they have, they may not be consistent when they select those options. It could be sort of a situational dependent choice, okay? Whereas in economics, we say the situation really doesn't matter. What matters is your preference set, prices, income, the information you have. The context you find yourself in shouldn't matter. But we find that it does, okay? So in other words, people are just people. They aren't robots, all right? So now once again, I'm not a psychologist. What I understand about psychology really is taken from some big psychologists in the field of economics. Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky are probably the main ones. And Kahneman has talked a lot about these kind of competing processes we have. So we have the Spock on one shoulder and Homer on the other shoulder, okay? So we have this, Spock is like our system 2, okay? Our system 2, which is deliberate and cognitive, and Homer is like our system 1, which is much more instinctive, okay, and intuitive, all right? So takes less time to process, and system 1 is much more irrational, okay? And so when we're thinking about the system 1, right, it tends to override our cognitive processes when we're tired, we're stressed, when we feel a lot of these demands on our cognitive resources. Okay, so some famous research, one of the earlier ones showing how when our cognitive, what they say, bandwidth is taken up, then we make a more hedonic choice. People had to memorize a number, and then they chose between a dessert and a bowl of fruit. And people, when they had a longer number to memorize, tended to choose that more hedonic choice, the cake. And so when our processes are kind of, our cognitive ability is constrained or taken by something else, and we tend to rely more on system 1 for other decisions. Okay. Then system 2 is this cognitive, right? This kind of, it's Spock. It's our Spock inside of us, and it requires effort, self-control. Okay, and so These are like the two systems we have within us, and so we're not all one or the other. But the situations in which we find ourselves, one can easily override the other, okay? And so we talk about, in economics, we talk about this kind of hot state, cold state bias, where when we're in the hot state, it's our system one that's really determining our choices. When we're in the cold state, we're much more relaxed, more deliberate, and it's much easier to make these decisions, all right? So why does this matter, okay? Well, if we think about in the context of food, the decisions we make, when we are in this hot state, it's much easier to make less deliberate choices and go for the more hedonic foods. Okay, when we're in a cold state, it's much easier to think about making a more appropriate decision, let's say. So if you think to the last time you went to a restaurant, you walk in and it's elegant, the food smells wonderful. You maybe walked in there thinking, today I've got to get the salad, but you sit down and it's relaxing, food smells good, and you end up getting something a little more calorically dense, all right? Or in the morning, you're thinking about what you're going to do throughout the day, and you say to yourself, I'm going to be healthy today, I'm going to pick a salad at lunch instead of a burger. But when you get to the cafeteria, you're hungry, you're tired, that burger sure smells good, okay? So that's the idea of a hot state versus a cold state, all right? When we're in these situations, when we find ourselves in like a hot state or a cold state, things that tend to influence us are convenience, attractiveness. If something's normative or socially appealing, okay? Or our environment, kind of the music, the lighting, the elegance of the situation can really drive those decisions that we end up making. And the point I want to make here is, well, if we think about the states we find ourselves in and how a lot of these situations influence us, is there a way to leverage this to help us improve the choices we make? For example, in the morning we're thinking about the foods we want to eat. What if we pre-pack our lunch or pre-order something so that's ready for us at lunchtime? Instead of us going to the cafeteria and making the selection on a hungry stomach, we've made it when we were full and in a cold state. Okay, so this concept of pre-ordering is valuable, and we actually did that in the lunchroom, and it works. But that's the idea. What can we do to leverage these behaviors that we understand in favor of promoting healthier food choices? All right. What does this mean for children? Well, children tend to have a less developed cognitive system. So if we can help them, right, make more deliberate decisions by making food more convenient, more attractive, more normative, etc., then what we can do is help them make these better food choices, food decisions. So what I want to do now is take you through a series of pilot studies that we've done, that I did while at Cornell, and we're still wrapping up publication of some of them. But take you through some pilot results, kind of show you the beginning of the thought process here and sort of the culminating product, if you will, that we developed from this research. And why I want to do this is because I think it's really fun just to talk about how it developed and talking to school lunch managers and helping them see, maybe it's just as simple as making the fruit a little more attractive. And, they don't tend to think that way, but maybe it's that simple. So, let's talk about Corning, New York, okay? The high school came to us, or middle school, came to us and said, no one's buying salad. How much are we going to have to, what will have to reduce the price of salad, or what are we going to have to do in order to get more kids to buy salad? They just didn't know. Should we add more things, right? Should we add little baby corn or, I don't know what else to get kids to eat the salad? That was their question. And we said, well, why don't we go look at your cafeteria and see? Well, let's talk about this. So we went in there. We saw a hot lunch line. Okay, if you imagine back to a school cafeteria, you got a hot lunch line, you have a couple registers. Okay, so kids would go through the hot lunch line, and then once they were done, They would go straight to the cash registers, and that was it, right? Well, where was the salad bar? Right there. So if you think about Johnny getting his tray, going through the hot lunch line, he's not really looking up and around, and where's that salad? He's just going straight to the cashier, right? That salad bar is in a very inconvenient location. And we said, well, what happens if we move it right there? So that while Johnny is just looking at the ground, he bumps into it, right? The next day, he bumps into it again. Maybe by the third or fourth time, he says, maybe I'll take some salad this time, okay? So the idea is make it just a little bit more convenient. How much does that cost? About 10 seconds of time to wheel that salad bar right there. That's it. Well, in this particular study, what happened? Within a 2-week period, salad sales had jumped by 200 to 300%. Okay, just by putting a salad bar in a little bit more convenient location. Okay, you think, well, yeah, that's kind of obvious, right? Just make it a little easier to get. Okay. What about this one? We were contacted by the New York State Department of Health, and they said, how much are we going to have to subsidize fruit in order to get kids to take more? Same kind of thing, right? We said, well, let's go take a look at the cafeteria. Where's the fruit? Okay, where is it? Well, it's kind of tucked in a corner in a stainless steel chafing pan underneath 2 tiers. All right, so first of all, it's not in a very attractive pan. Second of all, it's a little inconvenient. And kids might just walk past and not even know there was fruit on the line. Okay? So if you think back to your wonderful restaurant, right, from the beginning, how was the food presented? Okay, think about food presentation. I mean, that can, in and of itself, help us think the food's going to taste better. Just taste expectations when it's nice and looks good. Okay? So we said, well, before we talk about changing the price, why don't we just talk about this? Let's move that. Let's take the fruit out of that into a nice bowl and put it in a well-lit place so kids actually can see it and it's attractive. Okay? Well, whoops. Yeah. So when we told the schools this, we were working with 8 schools. They to do the study. One of them said, it's obvious, right? Of course. 2 schools said, that's never going to work. Right? They already decided that wasn't going to work. 5 other schools said, yeah, let's try it. Okay. When we did the study, okay, once again, this wasn't a randomized controlled study, basically just a before or after pilot test of concept. What we found was, we see right here, these blue bars are fresh fruit, red bars are canned, and green bars are total fruit together, okay? Or all the fruit added up, okay? And then we have this before months in December and January, and these after months in February and March. What we find, whoops, I pushed the wrong way. There we go, sorry. There we are. Right, we found that, a significant jump. We were able to move the dial in terms of fruit selection just by putting it in a bowl that costs $5 to $10 and putting it in a well-lit place. And we asked the schools, so when we were going to the schools and asking them about their results or asking them how it went, right? We collected the data, did the analysis, and we wanted to get some feedback. And one school lunch manager, we asked, how did it go? And she's like, well, I think it went okay. And we said, well, how much did your fruit sales increase by? And she said, well, they increased by 182%. And we said, well, my goodness, well, what did you do? She said, well, I got a desk lamp and put the lamp right on top of the fruit bowl, so it was just shining directly down, so the bowl of fruit had its own spotlight, right? We said, well, buy desk lamps for everybody, okay? Anyway, but the idea is that let's make it a little more obvious to the kids and attractive. Just something that simple. In the research, I'm not a qualitative, I really don't do qualitative work, but of course, we'll ask students in studies, what did you think about this, or how did you see any difference, or what do you think about your school lunch in general? A lot of times they say, oh, the fruit doesn't look that good, the vegetables don't look that good. And so what can we do to, I mean, in this case, the fruit was from the same place. We didn't change where we bought the fruit from the same place. What can we do to make it look just a little bit better? All right. Yeah, yeah.
At my son's elementary school, they have the free breakfast in the morning.
Uh-huh.
And they get typically oranges or apples, but the elementary school kids have like no teeth. And so there's a wellness committee at the school, and every morning there's a parent volunteer called the Fruit Ninja. And their job is, so the kids know that they just hold their fruit up in the air, and the Fruit Ninja comes by, takes it and cuts it up, and they've seen that the fruit consumption has increased dramatically just with that simple volunteer act. And it's like a 20-minute job in the morning, you know?
So we did a study on that.
Did you?
No, it's exactly right. The kids don't have teeth,
Right.
or they bite into the apple and they get juice everywhere.
Right.
Yeah,
They can't peel it.
they can't peel an orange or anything. Yeah, exactly.
Banana days are great. But
That's right. No, that's the same concept right there. Let's cut the fruit and...
What parent doesn't want to be the fruit ninja?
exactly.
Yeah, serious.
There's apron and everything. It says Fruit Ninja on the front of it.
How fun is that, right?
Columbus City Schools, Clinton, and Clinton.
Clean.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I mean that's the same concept, the same principle here that we're talking about. Just make it a little easier for the kids to eat, and they'll eat it, right? So what about associations? Now, if you think about that nice, elegant restaurant or the nice, loud restaurant where you remember eating, how were the foods named? Did you buy the cheeseburger, or did you buy the deluxe, bacon ranch cheeseburger, right? Or did you buy the chocolate cake? Or did you buy the double dark, dark chocolate, Belgian chocolate cake, okay? So naming foods can really have an impact, all right? Once again, it's this idea of taste expectations. What can we do to, help the kids think a little bit more about the foods? Why don't we name them? Instead of having a casserole, why don't we name it a macaroni veggie mania, okay? Or having carrots, why don't we name X-ray vision carrots? Or bean burrito, the big bad bean burrito, or salad, Superman salad, something that helps them kind of associate the food with something else they're familiar with, or something that just kind of excites their mind, right? Oh, this is kind of fun, right? In a study done by, I'm not on this, but it was done by my collaborators, they found when they gave names to foods, they were able to increase, for example, burrito assumption by more than 40%, okay? And then we're naming the salad or the carrots, X-ray vision carrots, we're able to increase salad and vegetable consumption by quite a bit, okay? And I mean, here's another thing. I don't know if you, when was this? This was in 2013 or 14, I can't remember. But Sesame Street joined with the Produce Association, and Sesame Street agreed to allow their characters to be used and to promote fruits and vegetables to kids. And so the concept is this, if we're able to associate some character kids are familiar with a fruit or a vegetable, right, how is that going to influence their food choice? And so the study here, once again done at the Food and Brand Lab, they asked kids in the control group, what do you want? Do you want these apples? Do you want some apples? Do you want some French fries? Okay. And then in the treatment group, they said, show a picture of a superhero like Batman or Superman or some other superhero, and they said, what do you think this superhero would eat? And then they said, what do you want? And just by creating that here are the results. And just by creating that association, 5 times more children actually took these like apple fries, okay? And the treatment versus the control group, okay? And we think about that in terms of calorie intake, it's a huge difference. Just by creating this association, all right? Now I will put in there are groups out there. Susan Lin is probably one of the biggest, one of the ones fighting most against advertising to children. So many of you may be familiar with her work. And so that is something of kind of a discussion out there in the public health area is advertising, do we want to advertise to kids? And I think that's a very interesting debate and something worth thinking about in terms of, kids are already inundated with advertising everywhere. I mean, we are as adults, kids definitely are as well. And so really thinking about advertising, how much do we want to do? Okay. And how do we want to do it, and can we leverage it in a positive way? So I think those are really interesting and important questions to ask. But what I'm showing here is results from a study that we did where it did have a positive impact. But yeah.
Go back to hot, cold.
Yeah. Sure.
Novelty. So confronted with a new choice,
Mm-hmm.
are you more likely to be deliberative or reactive?
Yeah, great question. So in the novelty case, you're probably more likely, well, so yeah, whenever there's this novelty bias in just about any case. So it's entering into this kind of hot state where you're like, ooh, this is a really cool product. I've never seen it before. I want to try it out. And so that definitely can bias, for example, experimental results. I'm guessing maybe you're getting at, maybe there's a novelty effect here.
It's not then habit.
Sure. Yeah. Yep. And so that's a, if we think about novelty effect in terms of research and take it to the next level, and we say, well, how much is that driving results? And that's a very fair question, and one that in this previous result where they named the vegetables, they actually did it over a 3-month period, and so the argument is that, well, that might be long enough to reduce that novelty effect. I'm about to do some research actually in Columbus City School District in the spring, where we are going to see at what point might the intervention the effect of the intervention kind of wears off, and we might need to refresh. And so, we're going to do a couple different experiments to see if we can pinpoint a novelty bias and separate that from the actual. But it's a very fair question, especially in this research, and primarily because these school semesters don't last very long, and working with the schools can be very costly. In terms of maintaining good rapport with them and having the manpower to collect the data you need. And so, definitely a very fair question. How about convenience? We're thinking about hot and cold, and when we're in a cold state, something convenient, we just grab it. Okay. I recently just published a paper about what's on your kitchen counter. Okay, if you're coming home from work and you're very hungry and you have the box of cookies right there, that's what you're going to grab instead of thinking, oh wait, maybe I shouldn't eat that. You're hungry, you're in a hot state, you're going for that. What we say is, well, having fruit on the counter can actually be correlated with better health outcomes or lower weight, in especially women. And so instead of having those cookies out there, why don't you put a bowl of fruit? So that when you're in that hot state, you've already made the decision beforehand what you're going to eat. So you have the fruit. We come to this concept of slicing the fruit, right? So what we did in upstate New York, which is apple growing country of the state, we actually went and worked with these elementary schools, and we gave them these fruit slicers, right? So that was kind of fun, where they put the fruit in this little plunger area, and you pull a lever down, and it sends the fruit right through. So I'm not sure what the Fruit Ninja had in your kids' schools. Oh, the standard. Okay, all right. So this is a little more expensive, but what we did, we had this in the cafeteria for a 6-week period, and we collected baseline data as well. And we found, even in apple-growing country where kids are used to eating apples, we could decrease apple waste by 30%. Now, the reason I put waste up here instead of consumption was because of the way we collected the data. In some of the schools, or one of the schools, we weren't able to know exactly how many apples the kids were taking. We could only measure how much they were throwing out. But relative to before and after, right, we saw a decrease in waste, and we looked at their actual food preparation records, and so selection increased. We saw more kids taking apples, whole apples in general, but since we couldn't measure student by student waste or consumption, we say the waste also decreased. So in essence, kids seem to be eating more of what they were taking. All right. What about making healthy foods more convenient? Not just cutting the foods, but thinking about making it take less time to get the healthy foods in the lunch line than in relative to the other lines. So what we did in a high school, they had 2 lunch lines, and on just the normal days, both lunch lines sold the same foods. Okay, all the same foods. But then on another day, so they sold the same food. So we spent 4 weeks and collected baseline data on tray waste and selection. And then what we did was we kind of retrofitted one of the lines to be a convenience line, but we put only the healthier entree on that line with fruits and vegetables. So it was just healthier foods. And the other lunch line had everything still. Had what was on line A and all like the desserts and the hot entrees, the more calorically dense entrees. And so what did we see when we collected the results? Well, we didn't really see, and because of the data we collected, we were able to actually attach calories to what the kids were taking and eating. And we didn't really see a change in calories consumed of the healthier foods that the kids were taking. Healthier foods being like the less caloric entree, the fruits, the vegetables. But we did see a dip in calories consumed for less healthy foods, okay? We didn't really see any change in white milk. We did see a little jump in flavored milk. This is because we actually, on the convenience line, we put flavored milk at the end, okay? And so flavored milk still has great nutrients, a lot of protein. But this is, what's that?
It was New York.
It was New York.
Apple and dairy state.
Oh, right. It was New York. Yes, exactly right. But what we saw here was this drop, and that was really the smoking gun for this study, to say, hey, look, if you make the healthier food a little more convenient, when the kids see the long line at the hot lunch line, they're just going to skip over to this convenient line. I'm going to grab that lunch. I'm going to have 50 fewer calories at lunchtime. And so.
How did you make the line more convenient? Can you describe that more?
Yeah. So all we did was, in this line right here, we put only, it was only the deli sandwiches essentially. So these are.
Things in orange?
Yes, exactly. All these things like the sub sandwiches, the salad, the fruit, and the vegetables, and the flavored milk. Yes. And so, but we put, and the purple things, this other lunch line had all this stuff, plus everything else, plus all, like the taco, the pizza, whatever else was being offered that day. And so it was more convenient because there was less selection. And so you could go through the line a lot faster. And so kids didn't have to wait as long in line, and so they could go through a lot faster. Yeah, thanks. I didn't describe that clearly enough. So what if we combine these concepts together and into a little more, into a bigger intervention, okay? And that was the idea of the Smarter Lunchrooms movement. What happens if we take three of our key results here, like naming the vegetables, making the fruit more attractive, a little more convenient? How happens if we do those things and kind of combine those into one intervention, right? And the reason we focused on those three was because a lot of lunchrooms aren't able to retrofit a lunch line to make it a little more convenient. You have space constraints. But everyone sells fruit and vegetables, and they have lunch lines pretty standard. So you can take the fruit, put it in a bowl. And then what we also said was put it in 2 locations on the lunch line, so it's a little more convenient. So it's not in one place only. We can take the vegetables, we can name the vegetables, give them these fun descriptive names that kids can relate to. And so I'm getting close to running out of time, but what I want to do is present here a much more rigorous study that we did in upstate New York.
Can I ask a question on
Yeah.
naming the vegetables?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Is there a certain age where it stops being effective to call them X-ray vision carrots? High schoolers like X-ray vision carrots as much as elementary students?
Right, that's a very fair question. So the study that we did was published was in middle schools, but you have a very good point that there is definitely this age difference in what you're going to call. So like high schoolers saying something like X-ray vision carrots, what are you doing?
But if you develop an appetite for kids in a younger age.
Right.
Sure.
High school kids will eat what they've always eaten.
That's true. That's true. So if you start them young, but for older ages, what we've suggested is using like the school mascot. So if you have the school mascots like the bobcat, call it the bobcat salad, or maybe call it like or use sports names or those kind of things. Figures that relate more to high school aged kids. So definitely age appropriate names is important. So did you have your hand up again?
No.
No? Oh, that's okay. I saw a hand. Anyway, so we did a pilot. We did a much more rigorous study, and the motivation really behind all this, and why do we really care, is that kids aren't eating enough fruits and vegetables, and there's this concern about obesity. More importantly, the school lunch program is often blamed for making kids fat. Okay, so what do we do about that? Well, the federal government in 2012 passed the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act. And out of this act came new nutrition requirements for school lunches. Of importance to me and to this particular presentation, I guess to the study that we did, was this particular requirement right here. So before the requirements were passed, for a lunch to be considered a school lunch under the National School Lunch Program, kids had to take 3 out of 5 components. These 5 components were a dairy, a fruit, a vegetable, a grain, and a protein. So if Johnny had on his tray a hamburger patty with a bun and a chocolate milk, he had his protein, which was the patty, the grain was the bun, and the milk was the dairy. That was a lunch. That was considered a school lunch. With the new regulations, they require one of those 3 items has to be a fruit or a vegetable for it to be reimbursable under the school lunch program. So in other words, now that Johnny, he didn't want the fruit or vegetable before, so he still gets his hamburger with a bun and his chocolate milk, but now he has to get a fruit or a vegetable. And so the argument for that was, well, kids, this concept of availability, giving it to kids. If you give the foods to the kids, a higher percentage will eat them. And to a certain degree, that's true, as long as it's a familiar food. One of the requirements was that that cafeterias offer a wider variety of vegetables, such as dark greens and oranges. And a lot of these kids just are not used to these foods. And so the concern was that little Johnny here, he's going to have an apple or a kale salad. He might just end up throwing that away, okay? And maybe he'll eventually eat the apple because it's familiar, but a kale salad or maybe some other types of vegetables that he's not used to. The research shows, and I show some citations in a little bit, that the research suggests that visual exposure for something unfamiliar is not sufficient for consumption. Okay, so just exposing them won't lead to consumption if it's an unfamiliar food. And so if we think about kind of this concept of reference or situation dependence, okay, the benefits of this new requirement, right? We have a new set of options, okay, where we have, we're talking about a fruit or vegetable on every tray, okay? We've increased variety, we've increased visual exposure, okay? So there's this research here talking about how this can influence choice. What are the negatives, however? There's no taste exposure, okay? It's just forcing the kids to put it on a tray. Students are required to take a fruit or vegetable, and there's a restriction on choice, okay? So they don't have the choice, and if they get to the end of the line, the school lunch lady says, you gotta have an apple. So they put the apple on the tray. Unfortunately, I go to a lot of lunchrooms, and they have a trash can right nearby where kids just throw that fruit out. In some places where the schools allow it, they will have a sharing table where kids can place the unwanted food on a sharing table, and so kids can eat it if they didn't want it. Or other kids can pick it up if they didn't want it. So that's their way around this waste problem. But this is really, we think about, it makes sense that, well, if we make this requirement, then you would expect waste to go up, right? Kids just aren't eating these foods, okay? And so, but we really wanted to test that, and then test an alternative explanation based on the principles we talked about, and say maybe we could use some of these smarter lunchroom techniques. And so I'll go through the specifics, the details really quickly. We worked with 43 schools in New York City, and we randomly assigned them to different intervention groups. Okay, one group was control group. One group was implemented the new USD regulations. Okay, so they had the nutritionist created a menu for, here it is, created a cycle menu for our study, and we implemented this in the spring of 2012, which was before the regulations were to be rolled out nationally, okay? Because we wanted to really provide some sort of prediction of waste. So we had the school nutritionist provided a menu for these 43 schools, so all 43 were producing the same thing. And we did a stratified random sample of schools, so we had elementary, middle, and high. We stratified on Borough, as well as age group. Okay, so we could appropriately account for any heterogeneity between these different groups. Okay, and then we had one group that was control. One group was going to implement the USDA strategies or the USDA regulations, and then we had another group of schools implement the USDA regulations plus our smarter lunchroom techniques. Okay, so this, moving the fruit, putting it in 2 locations, making it nice and attractive in a bowl, naming the vegetables. And then we had our final intervention was implementing the USDA regulations and then doing these other like marketing tactics. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that because it was more in a development phase. It was just thinking, okay, what if we kind of branded the lunchroom, made it more like a cafe, where it had a nice vinyl banner calling it like the Bobcat Cafe, and it had these like 8.5 by 11 POS signs all along the school lunch line. So trying to make it more like a restaurant sort of feeling, as opposed to your standard cafeteria. But that was once again that was more just we're kind of testing to see if that would have any impact. But the primary focus was smarter lunchrooms. What can this do? And so this was these were the different interventions we broke up into, as I said. And it was a randomized controlled design, okay? And so we're able to use the randomization as our strategy to identify this causal link between, before and after kind of behavior, saying we were able to identify a cause of waste increase or decrease of fruits and vegetables, okay? So here's some more of the details of the study, and this is a quick look at the demographics of the schools we were working in. We only had 43, and so as we do these comparisons, the sample size are pretty small. But this is what it looked like in terms of our sample. Okay. We collected 3 types of data. One were food production or food prep records. So every day, the cafeteria staff has to say how much they prepared for each food and how much they ended up serving, and they also collect information on how many kids took lunch. We also collected tray waste. That's where we sent researchers in to actually visually estimate how much food the kids were throwing away. And the way we did this was we sent researchers in before the lunch period started, and they weighed a couple servings of each food, so they had this visual picture of what a serving looked like. That's one of the great things about school lunchrooms, is that the portions are pretty standard. So you can do this kind of thing. And so they would weigh the foods, and so they would know what a serving of a piece of pizza looked like, or a serving of the fruit cocktail. So that when they were looking at what Sally is throwing away, they could, instead of having to take the tray and weigh all the waste, they could actually visually estimate, oh, she's throwing about a quarter of that away and about a half of that. So that's the method we used, was a quarter waste technique, where they would estimate whether none, a quarter, half, 3/4, or all of the food was thrown away. And that was a method that we had tested and developed in the lab, just to make the process a lot faster and to provide some validation. And it has high, this particular technique has high inter-rater reliability, okay, and so there's a high agreement between raters, people who are measuring food using the same technique, and it's about 95%. And so it's a very robust technique. And also, when you compare it to actually weighing the food, it's 90 to 93% accurate when you're actually compared to weighing. So it's a very accurate and much less costly method. So our econometric or our statistical methods, okay, we used HLM modeling. Sorry about the shadow right here. We used HLM modeling, and because students were nested within the school. So the intervention was at the school level, so we had to nest students at the school level. And we used random effects for at the school level, okay? And what we used was a difference in difference estimation. In other words, the interaction effect is what we were interested in. Looking at fruit waste and vegetable waste in the intervention schools during the treatment period relative to control schools during the baseline period, okay? And so really that interaction effect we're looking at. So the dependent variables of interest, the full study we looked at percent of kids buying lunch, percent of students taking lunch, taking fruits and vegetables, and then, and then the percent of the fruit wasted. Today I'm only going to present these results, just in consideration of time, okay? And so if we think about the model, we have our marketing intervention, right? It's kind of this branding sort of thing. The smarter lunchrooms method, okay? And then the USDA. So if you remember, as I explained it, these two methods had the USDA as well. So the idea was that, well, with these new regulations in place, can we increase fruit consumption or decrease fruit waste using this method, right? That was the main intervention of interest. And then what that allows us to do is do a coefficient comparison to pinpoint this particular result, okay? So these interaction effects were what we were mostly interested in, okay? Oh, sorry, I'd spent time fixing these, but the circle still didn't match up quite right. So as we look at our results here, we find that if we look at this, just looking at the USDA intervention, okay, this interaction effect right here, we see this is increase in waste. We see a 30% increase, 30 percentage point increase in fruit waste and a 27 percentage point increase in vegetable waste. So using this new, requiring a fruit or vegetable on every tray, we do see an increase in waste, which kind of confirms what we expected to see. But when we introduce these interventions, the smarter lunchroom technique or this marketing technique, what we see is a reduction of waste back to baseline levels, okay? So here we see a 30 percentage point increase. Here we see no statistically significant result. In other words, this waste was brought back down to baseline levels, and similar for vegetables. But in fact, we actually see vegetables for marketing, this marketing intervention, waste fell below the baseline levels. So they're actually eating more relative to baseline levels, okay? Now, the standard errors were much larger for this particular technique. That's why this one is significant, this one's not. So it's a little more precise. We're a little more precise in measuring this particular effect, okay? So if we think about these results and the research that's been done, there are two studies. I need to put these results in context of these two studies right here. What they found, they actually went and did research in schools, and they say these new regulations actually did not create an increase in waste. And they are right. What they found was, in some aspects, they did not. But in other aspects, if you read the paper closely, they did see an increase. But I also want to point out that these were in low-income settings. And one was in elementary schools, 2013. And Schwartz, actually I think the Schwartz was a wider age range, but it was all in these very low income settings, okay? And so if we think about these results relative to ours, there was a different demographic of students that we were doing the research on. And so it's important to keep in mind as we're thinking about these interventions, we actually might, as we see here, their results compared to ours, we see a difference in socioeconomic status and how kids are responding to these interventions. That's important to keep in mind. And so that's how we place our research in context of these individuals. We say, okay, you have your findings, but it's with a particular demographic. We have ours, and once again, ours is restricted to this set of 43 schools in New York City. and so it's not necessarily generalizable. But the takeaway is that if we want to really get a more general idea, then more research needs to be done on a more general body of students, okay? But we want to leverage biases in favor of these healthier behaviors, okay? What can we do? That's just the general takeaways. We do see evidence here in the pilot studies as well as this more rigorous study that we can leverage these behavioral biases in favor of healthier choices. And in particular, we can increase the amount of fruits and vegetables kids are eating using these behavioral economic techniques, okay? So that's the end of my presentation. I sorry, kind of went over time, but if anyone has any other questions, I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone might have. Questions about the study or concerns you might have. Yeah, Neil.
So you've not manipulated price in any of these?
We have not, no.
If you were knowing what you're aware of the studies that do, if you were to add on a price manipulation along with the smart lunch.
Sure. So once again, that's going to have a differential impact among socioeconomic groups because it can't be done amongst like community eligibility or districts that qualify to have lunch for all students. So that wouldn't really matter. But in cases where kids are paying a full price for their lunch, if you're able to make it more attractive, so there's research showing if you give kids a coin or a quarter, they'll eat more of their vegetables. And so if you're able to reduce the price of lunch amongst students who actually pay a full price, there's potential to increase. But if you're increasing the price of lunch and you're also increasing the attractiveness of the lunch and using these smarter lunchrooms, I don't know, I can't speak to the magnitude of those, but I can argue that the negative impact of the price increase has a potential to be offset at least some by these smarter lunchrooms. That would be my initial hypothesis because the idea is it's creating a much more much nicer atmosphere in which the kids are eating and making their food choices. What's that?
That's where the marketing's
That's what the marketing. That's what the marketing.
trying to increase the value.
Exactly.
Perceived value of the product.
Yeah, exactly. But we didn't do any price manipulation here, so marketing. In the marketing, I didn't speak much to that in the interest of time, but we named all of the foods. We gave them descriptive names, and then we did all the other stuff, right? So it was much like a much more hyped, smarter lunchrooms type of thing. But yeah, and so that's exactly what the marketing concept could do. Once again, though we haven't manipulated price at all. So.
But wouldn't price only matter if you're buying a la carte, or to order enough
Yes. It would only matter if you're buying a la carte or to kids who pay full price.
So you can't do it in Columbus.
Right, not in Columbus.
I'm not familiar. I don't know how the Columbus district lunches work.
Well, because it doesn't build it like.
Yeah, right. So in Columbus City schools, lunch and breakfast community eligibility provision in the school lunch program. But if you go to, any of the other areas like Hilliard, Worthington, Dublin, wherever else, a certain percentage of kids fall within what they call a free lunch, and then there's reduced lunch, which is set at there's a.
The programs at the school that my children.
Exactly.
So that's what I
Okay, right. Yeah, exactly. But then you have the other groups of students who pay a full price. And those are the ones that would be most affected by some sort of price manipulation. I was up in Delaware not too long ago. Was it Delaware? Yeah, up in Delaware. And it's a rather wealthy district. and so their free and reduced percentage is very low. But because of the amount of money flowing through the district, they're able to do very nice lunches. So they have nice cafeterias and they provide very nice meals for the students. They actually do not participate in the school lunch program, but they do their own lunches. And so, but that's usually the case in more wealthy districts. So.
I'm curious how common choice scenarios are in the upper grades, like middle school and high school, in an area where it is primarily free and reduced.
Yeah.
Like I know that at the elementary schools, they don't even have cafeterias. They just have hot boxes, and it's the
Right.
cardboard tray with the cellophane that you peel off. And so obviously all of this goes out the window because there's no choice to be made.
Right, so in elementary schools, a lot of those where there's very limited choice, yeah. In middle and high, they tend to have several options. So you'll usually have a hot entree or like a deli sandwich or a couple entree choices and then a couple fruit, vegetable choices. But in those cases, the choice is much more restricted.
Yeah.
And that's very true, yes. And
Are
that's,
you seeing that even in places where they're building new schools and they're not necessarily putting in cafeterias? Or, I mean, are they putting in cafeterias in the upper levels? Because, I mean, my son's school is relatively new and renovated, and their cafeteria is, like, the actual kitchen is not really a kitchen. It's a warming area, you know?
yes, so I'm assuming your son or your child's in elementary school still?
Yeah.
And so that's the way in Columbus City schools, if I remember correctly, the elementary schools, none of them prepare the food,
No.
but it's all, exactly, it's all prepared in downtown Columbus. But in middle and high school, it's actually prepared at the site. Yeah, and so that's the way Columbus is. So each district is different. And as you do this research, not one school is the same as another. They're all so different. Even within Columbus City schools, I visited multiple schools, and they're just so different.
Well, they have
And so-
really different building regulations as to what is required to put in for a cafeteria.
Right,
So they don't
right.
have to put in.
And so in that particular case that you're talking about, right, where they get one hot box, there's like no choice. So what do? A lot of this stuff does go out the window, but you can still create an environment that is appealing or inviting, right? And so that it's a much more comfortable eating environment for the child. And so that way it increases the chance that they will enjoy the experience and eat more of what they have available to them. I mean, there's research. The amount of time kids have to eat is also a problem. Like 20 minutes, really? And when recess is, there's research on that, recess before or after lunch. I mean, a lot of research going into time constraints, our kids running out because they're just ready to go to recess. And so there's a lot going into this. And by all means, I want to say I've found the solution. But this is a way to think about arranging a food environment for kids to help promote healthier choices. Yeah.
You're going to say yes, but I'm thinking of extending it to the breakfast position as well.
Yes, and so we were in talks at one point when I was at Cornell about doing that, but things kind of fell through. But yeah, one of the things that's interesting in breakfast is, I forget what it's called, but it's the distribution method in the cafeteria versus in the classroom. That's one way to think about it. Mm-hmm. Yep. I'm not as familiar with the school lunch. And so my research agenda is still on school lunchrooms, but I know that the Ben Center, where I was before, they've been looking into more of the breakfast. The regulations are a little bit different in terms of what you have to take. I can't remember what they are. I think you need like...
Flexibility in breakfast and you have lunch.
Yes.
There tends to be a limited range as well, but the options available.
Yeah, it's
But kids get more choice, even at the elementary level when they do it.
for lunch. So yeah, that's something I'm much less familiar with. So yeah, that could be very true. And I know that well, I won't say anymore because I'm not as familiar with it, but go ahead, did you?
Would you be willing to give this very presentation to a suburban school district, specifically Worthington?
Absolutely.
Has 19 buildings?
Yeah, yeah. I'd be more than happy. I know Cheryl, what's her name? Do you know Cheryl Graffeg? I can't say her last name. Anyway, so she is with Columbus, or I can't remember what her title is, a health and something with health through the State Department of Health. I can't remember her title, sorry. But she is actually going to Worthington schools and doing some of the smarter lunchrooms kind of like checklist. And she had contacted me saying, hey, I'm going to Worthington, do you have any tips? So I thought maybe you were familiar with that, but I'd be more than happy to go. Oh yeah, I'd be more than happy to go.
Justice
So,
from the Crane Center.
sure.
She's not here, but yeah, her children go to.
Okay. But yeah, I'd be more than, I have a business card I can leave with you, and you can contact me, and we can work something out.
I went to a presentation yesterday on the French school lunch program. Are you familiar with how the French do their school lunch program?
I'm not. No. But I do know in places like China, there's no choice. If you're talking about actually the way they do it in France, or if there's, okay.
Yeah, how they do it.
Yeah, yeah. I know that in China there's like virtually no choice. You get it, and that's what you get. And it's similar in other places.
Actually, most places in China, you've got to bring your own food.
Oh, is that the way it is?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
In most places. I just know that in places where they actually have on-site meals, and that's what you get. And if you don't like it, tough. And so, yeah. So,
So I work for a nationwide children's hospital.
okay.
And several years ago, as just part of our initiative for our cafeteria, we removed sugar-sweetened beverages.
Okay.
And then we did a follow-up study to see what the impact of that was. And basically, we saw upticks in other types of beverages, and basically it had a revenue neutral effect on the whole. I'm wondering what your thoughts are about if school cafeterias removed chocolate milk or removed sugar-sweetened beverages. Would you expect there to be a positive, negative, or no overall impact? Or something like that?
Sure.
In terms of either revenue or in terms of food selection.
Yeah. So we actually did a pilot study with that from a school district in the West, where they came to us with a similar, with a concern because their school board had requested that all flavored milk be removed from the cafeterias. And the food service director from the district came to us and said, hey, can you help me analyze these data so we can see what's going on? And so we actually published a paper about it. It's our chocolate milk study. And what we found was what they did was they removed, so what we did was we compared milk selection in the 2 years, in the fall of 2 years, where there was chocolate milk in this 1 year, and then afterwards there was no chocolate milk, it was just white milk. And then in the period where, I'm trying to think back to, I won't say that because I don't remember exactly how it happened, but what we found was there was an increase, of course, in white milk selection, but it did not offset total milk selection, and we actually saw an increase in milk waste. And so kids weren't, while there were more kids taking chocolate milk, more of it was being thrown away than before. And we did see a decrease in, an associated decrease in participation in the school lunch program. And so it did have an impact that way. But there were some other confounding effects, so that we weren't able to say that was a true causal effect from what we saw. And
One of the hypotheses would be basically if there wasn't chocolate milk, some kids might not decide to go for lunch.
yep, exactly. That's exactly right. And so, and you know, chocolate milk is a pretty, kids like it. And so in the particular school lunchroom setting, that's what we saw in this particular district, right? And in other districts where we've seen something similar, we haven't done like particular statistics or studies on it, but we have seen pushback when chocolate milk's removed. Now, as far as other sugar-sweetened beverages, I know the USDA has really cracked down on that in school lunchrooms. Yeah, they're completely. I can't remember if it's in vending machines they can sell them or not in high schools.
In high schools after a certain.
After, that's right, at like.
6 o'clock or something.
Right.
They
So it's
can
like.
serve it for football and basketball.
Right. And so it's very restricted that way. But yeah, it definitely, so it depends on the type of school you're going to look at as far as how the revenues are going to be affected. If it's in a wealthier district, yeah, revenues are going to be really impacted because kids are like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to bring my stuff from home, right? There was a situation in LA City schools where they did a complete revamp of the whole lunch menu, where they got rid of their nuggets and their hot dogs and burgers and everything, and replaced it with much more like these pad thai type meals or curry chicken meals. And there was school lunch participation dropped by 13% in the period when they had done this. And kids were actually bringing stuff from home and selling it on this underground market. And so when there's more selection, you have to be careful about those sorts of things. But in school districts where there's community eligibility, it's not as we saw at the other research, it might not be as big of an issue because kids are used to not having that much freedom of choice. And then so doing the sorts of restrictions may not be as big of a deal. So that's my long-winded response to you. It really depends on the population you're working with. But yeah, I would suspect if there's enough freedom of choice, there's going to be some revenue impact. And you also have to think, what are they eating outside of school? If they're not getting what they want in school, what are they eating afterwards? And I'm doing some research on that too, which is interesting. But that'll have to be for another time.
In our district,
yes.
a black market offers salt and sugar since we're not allowed to provide any salt or sugar.
Right, because there's a sodium reduction on it.
Selling salt packets and sugar packets.
Yeah. How much are they going for?
What's that?
It's like $1.
$1.
Wow.
Per salt packet or per sugar.
So those are the entrepreneurs in the district, right?
Second, third, fourth grade.
Are you second?
Yeah.
Wow.
You know, they, but now, with respect to flavored milk, the 2012 regs, it can only be non-fat.
Right.
You can't use 1% milk and have chocolate. Chocolate milk has to be non-fat.
Has to be fat-free only. Yes. Any flavored milk.
Well, some of the calories are pretty high.
They are. Oh, absolutely. They are. Yeah, I guess my thought is if that's the way some kids are getting those nutrients, that's okay. So.
Because of the dairy, we're the only country in the world that provides lunches that provides milk, or that even allows milk.
Yeah, there's.
Because of the dairy industry.
It's the dairy lobby. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
France, even Switzerland.
Yeah, no other country.
There's
has
no
milk
milk
consumption
at schools.
so.
Finland, Norway, Finland.
No, there's a big dairy lobby. Yes.
Yes.
So, that's for sure.
And nobody serves milk except in Canada, they don't, Australia, New Zealand.
Even in Switzerland,
No,
big dairy
just
countries.
water.
Wow, interesting.
They just have sheep and goats in Switzerland.
Oh, okay.
They just make cheese with their milk.
Just cheese. Okay.
Well, our school district had to eliminate
Yeah.
sugar beverages. We switched to 100% juice and froze it like a slushie.
Yeah.
And those sales went through the roof.
Yeah. So I've seen that as well, where districts will sell them frozen, and it's kind of like eating. Oh yeah. Those are super popular. Yeah, exactly.
They were eating the whole fruits instead, but soda popper. No way. What's that? No,
You just freeze the fruit juice.
Those little plastic cups with the foil
4 ounces.
lid.
They're 4 ounces.
Yeah.
We sell for $1. And they go.
Kids will go.
They're
Yeah.
on before the 5th and 6th graders even get to the lunchroom.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Those are definitely popular types of things. Now, my comment would be, if sugar sweetened beverages aren't in school lunchrooms, but maybe at Nationwide or other places where they are available, maybe consider, instead of removing them, consider putting water in front of them. the lower calorie beverages in front. So those are more convenient relative to the sugar sweetened beverage. So you have to like reach behind. Or if you have like a big beverage cooler, you have water in those kind of mid sections where that's the first thing you see. And then you have to look higher or lower to see the other stuff. So just make it a little bit more convenient. Or, they have to ask for it or something like that,
If it's children, why would you even want to offer for it? If it's pregnant. There's no nutritional reason to be offering children.
That's true.
It's either
No.
That's
sugar flavored.
Yes, but I think you have to keep in mind that so often children, children's hospital have been through painful procedures.
a treat to the kid. No, I mean, you're right. Like, yeah. All right. Well, thank you. Thanks for your time and your interest. So.